My hands trembled as I smoothed down the wrinkles of my modest black dress, the only decent outfit I owned that wasn't stained from my double shifts at the diner. The restaurant's dim lighting cast everyone in a flattering glow, but I knew it wouldn't be enough to mask my exhaustion. 3 jobs, a mountain of medical bills from my father's cancer treatments, and an eviction notice taped to my apartment door this morning. A blind date was the last thing I needed tonight. But Melissa had insisted. "Just one night off, Emma. You're going to collapse if you keep this up." My roommate meant well, setting me up with her boyfriend's college buddy. A junior accountant, she'd said. Stable, nice, safe. The maitre d' led me through the restaurant, a place so expensive I could feel my credit card melting in my clutch, just breathing the air. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings, and the soft melody of a live piano floated through the space. Far too upscale for a junior accountant, but maybe he was trying to impress. "Your party is already seated, miss," the host said with practiced courtesy, gesturing vaguely toward the back before being called away by another server. I scanned the dining room, my heart hammering against my ribs. Blind dates were my personal version of hell. The awkward small talk, the forced laughter, the inevitable disappointment in their eyes when they realized I wasn't what they'd expected. According to the description, I was looking for a sandy-haired man in his late 20s wearing a blue button-down. That's when I saw him, alone at a corner table, his attention fixed on his phone. He wasn't wearing blue, but the restaurant's lighting could be playing tricks. I took a deep breath and approached, slipping into the empty chair across from him. "Hi, I'm Emma," I said, my voice barely audible over the ambient noise. "You must be Ryan?" When he looked up, the air vanished from my lungs. This was not a junior accountant. The man before me had the kind of presence that seemed to bend the light around him, dark hair swept back from a face that belonged on Italian currency. All sharp angles and perfect symmetry. His eyes were almost black in the dim lighting, framed by lashes so thick they cast shadows on his cheekbones. He wore a suit that probably cost more than 6 months of my rent, the material so fine it seemed to absorb rather than reflect the light. But it wasn't his devastating appearance that made my stomach drop. It was the sudden stillness that fell over our corner of the restaurant. The servers, who had been bustling efficiently, now gave our table a wide berth. The 2 men at the bar, who I'd barely registered when I walked in, had shifted to face us, their expressions carefully blank. The man tilted his head slightly, studying me with the detached curiosity of someone examining an unexpected insect in their home. Mildly interesting, but ultimately destined to be crushed. "I'm not Ryan," he said finally. His voice was deep, with the faintest trace of an accent I couldn't place. It slid over my skin like cool silk. "And you're at the wrong table." Heat rushed to my face. "I'm so sorry," I stammered, already halfway out of my chair. The host pointed in this direction, and I thought, "Sit down." It wasn't a request. Though he hadn't raised his voice, the command froze me in place. I sank back into my seat, my pulse thudding in my ears. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but my body refused to obey. "Your name is Emma," he said. Not a question. I nodded, my mouth dry. His eyes never left mine as he lifted a hand. Immediately, a server materialized at his side, head slightly bowed. "Mr. Castellano would like to order," he murmured, addressing me rather than the man across from me. Mr. Castellano. The name stirred something in my memory. A newspaper headline, perhaps, or a whispered conversation overheard at the diner. "She'll have the risotto al tartufo and a glass of the Barolo," Mr. Castellano said, dismissing the server with the slightest inclination of his head. "I understand there's been a mistake, Emma, but now I'm curious. Who are you expecting to meet?" The way he said my name, like he was tasting it, sent a shiver down my spine. "A blind date," I admitted, hating how small my voice sounded. "My roommate set it up. He's supposed to be an accountant named Ryan wearing a blue shirt." Mr. Castellano's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "An accountant. How thrilling for you." I should have been offended by his condescension, but something in his expression made me want to explain myself. I wasn't really looking forward to it, I confessed. I only agreed because Melissa wouldn't stop nagging me about working too much. And what is it that you do, Emma, that consumes so much of your time? I fidgeted with the cloth napkin in my lap. I wait tables at Rosie's diner during the day, handle bookkeeping for a mechanics shop in the evenings, and I clean office buildings on weekends. For the first time, something like genuine interest flickered in his eyes. 3 jobs. Ambitious. Desperate, I corrected without thinking, then immediately regretted my honesty. The server returned with the wine, pouring a small amount for Mr. Castellano to taste. He gave an almost imperceptible nod, and my glass was filled. I hadn't touched alcohol in months, couldn't afford the luxury, and was afraid my empty stomach would betray me if I drank it. So, Emma, he said, lifting his own glass. Tell me why a young woman is working herself to death with 3 menial jobs. I shouldn't tell him anything. I should excuse myself, find the actual Ryan, and forget this bizarre encounter. Instead, I heard myself say, my father's medical bills. He passed away 3 months ago. Cancer. Something shifted in Mr. Castellano's expression, a softening so subtle I might have imagined it. You're paying off a dead man's debts, he observed. The bluntness stung. He was all I had, I said, lifting my chin slightly. And his life was worth more than a number on a hospital bill. Mr. Castellano studied me for a long moment, then reached for his glass. To your father, he said, raising it slightly. The unexpected gesture caught me off guard. I lifted my own glass, taking a small sip. The wine was rich and complex, nothing like the cheap bottles Melissa sometimes brought home. And your mother? He asked, setting down his glass. She left when I was 4. I don't remember her. His eyes narrowed fractionally. So you're alone in the world. The way he said it, not with pity, but as though cataloging a fact, made my skin prickle. Before I could respond, a man approached our table. He was tall, with the build of someone who spent considerable time at the gym, wearing an earpiece barely concealed by his close-cropped hair. He bent to whisper in Mr. Castellano's ear, his expression grave. I caught a glimpse of a shoulder holster beneath his jacket, and my blood turned to ice. The whispered exchange lasted only seconds before Mr. Castellano gave a curt nod, and the man retreated to his position by the bar. Is everything okay? I asked, though it was clear I had no right to such information. A minor business matter, Mr. Castellano replied, dismissing my concern with a wave of his hand. I couldn't help but notice the heavy platinum watch that encircled his wrist, or the signet ring on his little finger. Tell me, Emma, do you know who I am? The question hung between us, loaded with implications I couldn't fully grasp. I shook my head. Good, he said simply. Our food arrived, a fragrant risotto for me, and some kind of rare steak for him. I hadn't eaten since a hastily consumed granola bar at lunch, and despite my nervousness, my stomach growled audibly at the smell. Eat, he commanded, his mouth quirking at my embarrassment. The first bite nearly made me moan. Rich, earthy truffle, perfectly cooked rice, and a depth of flavor I'd never experienced in my life of diner food and instant ramen. Mr. Castellano watched me with undisguised amusement as I tried to maintain some dignity while wanting to devour the plate. Your accountant is at the bar, he said suddenly, nodding toward a harried-looking young man in a wrinkled blue shirt, anxiously checking his watch. He's been watching you for the last 10 minutes, trying to decide if he should interrupt. I twisted in my seat to look, mortified. The sandy-haired man met my eyes briefly, before quickly looking away, his discomfort obvious even across the room. I should go, I said, setting down my fork. This was a mistake. I'm sorry for interrupting your evening. Do you want to go to him? Mr. Castellano asked, his voice deceptively soft. Did I? The thought of making painful small talk with a stranger while this man watched from across the room was unbearable. But the alternative, staying here with someone who clearly operated in a world I couldn't begin to understand, seemed equally unwise. No, I admitted. But I've taken enough of your time. I decide when you've taken enough of my time. There was no anger in his voice, only calm certainty. Finish your meal, Emma. Your accountant will survive the disappointment. As if on cue, Ryan rose from his bar stool and left the restaurant, shoulders slumped in defeat. I should have felt guilty. Instead, I felt relieved. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, unable to contain my confusion any longer. Mr. Castellano leaned forward slightly, and I caught the scent of his cologne, something expensive and subtle, with notes of sandalwood and amber. "Because in a world of people who want things from me, you sat at my table by mistake and tried to leave the moment you realized your error. It's refreshing." There was more to it than that. I could sense it in the calculated way he watched me, in the occasional glances from his men positioned around the restaurant. But in that moment, with the first decent meal I'd had in months warming my stomach, and the first glass of wine dulling the constant edge of anxiety I lived with, I couldn't bring myself to care. "Do you often dine alone, Mr. Castellano?" I asked, surprising myself with my boldness. A shadow passed over his face. "I'm never alone, Emma. That's the problem." His gaze flicked briefly to the men at the bar, then back to me. "And you should call me Dante Castellano." The name tugged again at my memory, harder this time. I'd definitely heard it before, probably in hushed tones at the diner where cops and city workers often ate. "You still don't recognize me," he observed, seeming pleased. "That's good. Finish your wine." I obeyed, feeling the warm flush of alcohol spread through my limbs. When I set down the empty glass, he signaled for the check without looking at it, passed over a credit card, and then stood in one fluid motion. "I'll drive you home," he announced. "That's not necessary," I protested weakly, even as he moved behind my chair to help me up. His proximity sent a jolt through me. He radiated heat and a kind of coiled energy that made me acutely aware of every inch of space between us. "It wasn't an offer," he said, his breath warm against my ear. As we moved through the restaurant, I noticed how the other diners averted their gaze, how the staff seemed to hold their breath as we passed. Outside, a sleek black SUV waited at the curb, its engine running. The man with the earpiece opened the rear door as we approached. Dante guided me with a light touch at the small of my back, a touch that burned through the thin fabric of my dress. I hesitated at the open door, my momentary wine-induced courage evaporating. "Second thoughts, Emma?" Dante's voice was low, amused. "You've already made one mistake tonight. Refusing my courtesy would be a second." The implied threat hung in the air between us. Yet strangely, I wasn't afraid. Not in the way I should have been. Instead, I felt a dangerous thrill as I slid into the leather seat, Dante following close behind. As the door closed with a solid thunk, sealing us in the cocoon of luxury and subtle danger, I realized I'd made far more than a simple seating error tonight. I'd walked into a cage I hadn't even seen. And judging by the satisfied gleam in Dante Castellano's dark eyes as the car pulled away from the curb, I suspected he had no intention of letting me out. The SUV glided through the night-shrouded city streets like a phantom, its tinted windows sealing us away from the world outside. I sat rigid against the butter-soft leather, acutely aware of Dante beside me. Not touching, but close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. The interior smelled of expensive leather and his subtle cologne, creating an intoxicating bubble that made it hard to think clearly. "Your address?" he asked, his voice breaking the tense silence. I hesitated, suddenly reluctant to reveal where I lived. My apartment was in a neighborhood most people avoided after dark, a crumbling 6-story walk-up with temperamental plumbing and paper-thin walls. The thought of this man seeing how I lived made my cheeks burn with shame. "I can take a cab," I offered weakly. Dante's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Your address, Emma." I swallowed hard and gave it to him. He relayed it to the driver without comment. But I didn't miss the brief, telling glance the man gave his boss through the rearview mirror. "It's not the best area," I said defensively, staring at my hands folded in my lap. Clearly, his judgment stung more than it should have. "Not all of us can afford 5-star restaurants and chauffeurs, Mr. Castellano." "Dante," he corrected, a hint of amusement softening his stern features. "And your living situation is a choice, Emma. There are always other options." "Not moral ones," I retorted before I could stop myself. To my surprise, he laughed, a rich, warm sound that transformed his face entirely. For a moment, he looked younger, almost approachable. Almost. "Morality is a luxury," he said, the laughter fading from his eyes, one you clearly can't afford at the moment. Before I could respond, he leaned forward slightly. "You mentioned your father's medical bills. How much?" The abrupt question caught me off guard. What? "How much do you owe?" he repeated, his tone making it clear he expected an answer. I shifted uncomfortably, just over $73,000. Dante nodded thoughtfully. "And the eviction notice? How far behind are you?" My head snapped up. "How did you—" "You mentioned it at dinner, inadvertently." His eyes held mine, unblinking. "How much?" 3 months, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "About $2,400. He considered this information with the detached interest of someone evaluating a business proposition. "And your other debts? Student loans? Credit cards?" "Why are you asking me this?" I demanded, embarrassment giving way to irritation. "Is my financial disaster entertaining to you?" Instead of being offended by my outburst, Dante seemed pleased by it. "There she is," he murmured, almost to himself. "I was wondering when you'd show your claws." The SUV slowed, and I realized with a sinking feeling that we'd arrived at my building. Even in the darkness, its shabby exterior and graffiti-tagged entrance were unmistakable. A group of teenagers loitered on the corner, passing something between them that I pretended not to notice. Dante surveyed the scene with a tightening around his mouth. "Wait here," he instructed before I could reach for the door handle. To my astonishment, he exited the vehicle himself, conferring briefly with his driver and another man who had materialized from a second SUV that I hadn't even noticed following us. After a moment, he opened my door and extended his hand. "I'll see you to your door," he said, in a tone that brooked no argument. His hand was warm and unexpectedly calloused when I placed mine in it, his grip firm as he helped me from the car. The teenagers scattered as we approached, Dante's mere presence enough to clear our path. I fumbled with my keys at the entrance, hyper-aware of him standing behind me, his breath stirring the hair at the nape of my neck. The building's foyer smelled of damp and bleach, the fluorescent lighting harsh after the muted elegance of the restaurant and car. I cringed inwardly, imagining how this must look through his eyes. "Which floor?" he asked, glancing at the out-of-order elevator with distaste. "5th, I admitted. "The elevator's been broken for months." Without comment, Dante gestured for me to lead the way up the narrow stairwell. I climbed in awkward silence, grateful that at least tonight the usual smell of marijuana was absent from the stairwell. When we reached my landing, I hesitated before apartment 5C. "Well, this is me," I said lamely. "Thank you for dinner and the ride." "I'm sorry again about the mix-up." Dante said nothing, simply waiting. It took me a moment to realize he expected to come inside. My pulse quickened. "It's late," I tried. "Open the door, Emma." With shaking hands, I turned the key, hyper-aware of the peeling paint and the number 5 hanging askew on the door. Inside wasn't much better. A small, sparsely furnished living room visible from the threshold. The second-hand furniture neat but worn. The eviction notice was still taped to the back of the door, its bold red lettering impossible to miss. Dante stepped past me into the apartment, his presence immediately making the space seem smaller. He surveyed my home with the same clinical detachment he'd shown at the restaurant, taking in the water stain on the ceiling, the stack of textbooks on the coffee table, the framed photograph of my father and me from my high school graduation. I closed the door and leaned against it, watching him move through my life like a panther in a dollhouse. He stopped at the photo, picking it up with unexpected gentleness. "Your father?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. I nodded. "Before he got sick." Dante studied the image. "You have his eyes." The unexpected observation made my throat tighten. I'd spent hours staring at that photo, searching for pieces of him in myself, holding on to whatever fragments I could now that he was gone. "Is your roommate home?" Dante asked, setting the frame down exactly where it had been. "Melissa works nights at the hospital. She won't be back until morning." As soon as the words left my mouth, I realized how they sounded, like an invitation. Heat rushed to my cheeks. I mean, you should probably go. It's late, and I have an early shift tomorrow. Dante turned to face me fully, his dark eyes unreadable. You're afraid of me. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. Should I be? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Yes. The simple honesty of his response sent a shiver down my spine, and yet, I remained where I was, my back against the door, making no move to open it. Who are you, really? I asked, my voice barely audible even in the quiet apartment. I think you know, he replied, moving closer. Your body knows, even if your mind is still catching up. He stopped just inches away, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. This near, I could see the faint scar bisecting his left eyebrow, the flecks of amber in his otherwise dark irises. I've heard whispers, I admitted. At the diner, the name Castellano. And what do they say? His voice had dropped lower, a dangerous purr that I felt more than heard. That you're connected, powerful, dangerous. I swallowed hard. That people who cross you disappear. Dante reached up slowly, telegraphing his movement as if dealing with a skittish animal. His fingers brushed a strand of hair from my face, the touch feather-light, but leaving fire in its wake. And yet, here you are, alone with me. Not by choice, I reminded him, struggling to keep my voice steady. His smile widened fractionally. Wasn't it? You could have left the restaurant. You could have refused the ride. You could have called for help on the stairs. He was right, and we both knew it. Despite every warning bell, every instinct for self-preservation, I had followed this dangerous man into the night, had invited him into my home. Why am I here, Dante? I asked, the question emerging more vulnerable than I'd intended. Because you intrigue me, he said simply. You work 3 jobs to pay a dead man's debts out of some misplaced sense of honor. You live in squalor rather than take the easier paths available to a young woman of your attributes. His gaze swept over me in a way that made my skin flush. You're either a saint or a fool, and I find myself curious which it is. Maybe I'm neither, I countered, finding my voice. Maybe I'm just trying to survive without losing myself in the process. Something flashed in his eyes. Respect, perhaps, or recognition. A noble sentiment, misguided, but noble. He stepped back, granting me space to breathe, and reached inside his jacket. I tensed automatically, but he withdrew only a business card, offering it between 2 fingers. My private number, he said, as I hesitantly accepted it. The card was thick, creamy stock, with only a phone number embossed in dark ink. No name, no company. If you ever find yourself in trouble. I stared at the card. Why would you help me? I didn't say I would help you, Dante corrected. Only that you should call. With that cryptic statement hanging between us, he moved toward the door. I stepped aside automatically to let him pass, but he paused with his hand on the knob. Lock this behind me, he instructed. This neighborhood isn't safe. The irony of a man like him warning me about danger wasn't lost on me. I've managed so far. Dante gave me a long, assessing look. Sleep well, Emma Carter. I'll see you soon. Before I could ask what he meant, he was gone, the door closing quietly behind him. I stood frozen for a moment before rushing to engage the deadbolt and chain, my heart hammering. Through the thin walls, I could hear his measured footsteps descending the stairs, fading until silence reclaimed the building. Only then did the full impact of the evening hit me. He knew my last name. I hadn't told him my last name. I sank onto the worn couch, the business card still clutched in my trembling fingers, and tried to process the surreal encounter. The mysterious Dante Castellano, whoever he was, had just upended my carefully controlled existence with the casual ease of someone swatting a fly. Sleep eluded me that night. I tossed in my narrow bed, replaying every moment, every word, every loaded glance. The weight of his attention had been both thrilling and terrifying, like standing at the edge of a precipice, knowing one wrong step meant falling, but being unable to step back from the view. I must have drifted off eventually, because the blaring of my alarm shocked me awake at 5 a.m. The harsh fluorescent light of the bathroom revealed dark circles under my eyes, as I prepared for my morning shift at the diner. I looked exhausted, haunted, and yet somehow more alive than I'd felt in months. The diner was already bustling when I arrived. The morning regulars, mostly cops and construction workers, filling the vinyl booths and counter seats. I tied my apron with practiced movements, nodding to Gina, the other morning waitress, as I clocked in. "You look like hell," she observed bluntly, sliding past me with a pot of coffee. "Thanks," I muttered, pulling order slips from the spike. "Table 6 has been waiting on their check for 10 minutes, she added over her shoulder. Sally called in sick again, just another day in paradise. I grabbed the coffee pot and made my rounds, topping off cups and taking orders on autopilot, my mind still caught in the gravity well of last night's encounter. Had it even been real, the business card, tucked safely in my wallet, was the only tangible evidence that Dante Castellano wasn't some wine-induced hallucination. "Emma!" Gina's sharp voice cut through my fog. "Your order's up, and Table 4's been trying to get your attention." I turned to Table 4 and froze. 2 men in dark suits occupied the booth by the window, not Dante, but clearly cut from the same cloth. One was the driver from last night. They watched me with the measured patience of predators, and I knew with absolute certainty they hadn't come for the diner's mediocre breakfast special. With leaden feet, I approached their table. "Coffee?" I offered, proud that my voice remained steady. "Please," said the driver, his expression impassive. When I'd filled both cups, he slid a thick envelope across the table. "Mr. Castellano asked us to deliver this to you." I stared at the envelope, not touching it. "What is it?" "Not our business," replied the second man, stirring sugar into his coffee, "but he expects confirmation of receipt." The envelope seemed to pulse on the laminate tabletop, a live thing demanding attention. Around us, the diner continued its morning rhythm, unaware of the strange transaction taking place in plain sight. "I'm working," I said weakly. "I can't—" "It won't take long," interrupted the driver, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. With reluctant fingers, I picked up the envelope. It was heavy, expensive cream-colored paper sealed with what appeared to be actual wax, a stylized C impressed into deep red. Carefully, I broke the seal and peered inside. Cash. More cash than I'd ever seen in one place, and beneath it, a folded document. I extracted the paper with numb fingers, scanning its contents. It was a receipt from the hospital that had treated my father, stamped "paid in full" in bold red letters. The amount, $73,157.89, exactly matched what I owed. My legs threatened to give way. I grabbed the edge of the table to steady myself, blood rushing in my ears. Why would he? "Mr. Castellano also said to give you this," the driver continued, producing a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. I shook my head, finding my voice at last. "No, I can't accept this. Any of it. Tell him thank you. But no." The men exchanged a glance that made my stomach knot. "That would be inadvisable," said the second man carefully. "Mr. Castellano doesn't like to be refused." "I don't care what he likes," I snapped, surprising myself with the vehemence in my voice. "I don't know him. I don't owe him. And I don't want to be owned." Because that's what this was. A purchase. Of what, exactly? I wasn't sure, but I recognized a gilded cage when I saw one. The driver sighed, as if dealing with a particularly stubborn child. He said you might react this way. He placed the velvet box beside the envelope. "This isn't a negotiation, Miss Carter. Mr. Castellano will expect you at 8 o'clock tonight. The car will collect you at 7:30. And if I refuse," his smile didn't reach his eyes, "let's not find out." With that ominous statement hanging in the air, both men rose in unison, leaving cash for their untouched coffees. The driver paused, placing a business card beside the money, identical to the one Dante had given me. "For when you come to your senses," he said quietly. "Some offers only come once, Miss Carter." I watched them leave, the envelope and box burning like hot coals on the table before me. Around me, the diner had gone oddly quiet, the regular customers studiously avoiding my gaze. "Jesus, Emma," breathed Gina suddenly at my side. "Do you know who those guys work for?" I nodded numbly, still staring at the door. "What the hell did you do to get his attention?" She whispered, fear evident in her voice. I turned to her, reality crashing down around me like breaking glass. I sat at the wrong table. The remainder of my shift passed in a blur. Every time the bell above the door chimed, I flinched, half expecting Dante himself to materialize among the breakfast crowd. The envelope and box sat untouched in my locker, their presence a gravitational force I couldn't escape. By the time I clocked out at 2, my nerves were frayed to breaking. Instead of heading to my bookkeeping job, I called in sick for the first time in 3 years. I needed time to think, to breathe, to figure out how I'd stumbled into this bizarre situation, and how to extract myself. Back in my apartment, I emptied the contents of the envelope onto my kitchen table. Neat stacks of $100 bills fanned out across the scratched laminate, more money than I'd make in a year of triple shifts. The hospital receipt stared up at me, its red, paid in full stamp like an accusation. With trembling fingers, I finally opened the velvet box. Inside, nestled against black satin, lay a delicate silver bracelet. Not ostentatious or gaudy as I'd feared, but elegantly simple, a thin chain with a small charm in the shape of a key. Tastefulness somehow made the gift more disturbing. He'd seen me, really seen me, in a way that made me feel transparent, vulnerable. I snapped the box shut and pushed it away, pacing the cramped confines of my apartment. This was madness. One accidental dinner, and suddenly, a man I'd never met before last night was paying off my debts and sending cars for me. People like Dante Castellano didn't do such things out of kindness. Every gift had a price tag, one likely higher than I could afford. My phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. How was the date with Ryan? Details. I barked out a laugh tinged with hysteria. If she only knew. The clock on the microwave read 3:17, 4 hours until the car would arrive. If I was foolish enough to get into it again, I should call the police, or run, or both. But even as these thoughts raced through my mind, I knew they were futile. The way the diner had hushed when Dante's men entered, the way the cop at the corner booth had suddenly found his coffee fascinating. Whoever Dante Castellano was, he existed beyond ordinary systems of protection. At 6, I found myself in the shower, washing away the diner grease and sweat. At 6:30, I was rifling through my meager wardrobe, discarding one outfit after another. By 7:15, I stood before the mirror in the only dress I owned that wasn't for work. A simple navy blue wrap dress Melissa had insisted I buy for job interviews. My reflection stared back at me, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something else I didn't want to name. I looked better than I had in months, the dark circles under my eyes concealed with borrowed makeup, my hair falling in soft waves around my shoulders. This is insane, I told my reflection. You're not going. But even as I said it, I was fastening the silver bracelet around my wrist. At precisely 7:30, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, downstairs. I took a deep breath, grabbed my purse, and left before I could change my mind. The same black SUV waited at the curb, the driver opening the rear door as I approached. I hesitated at the threshold, reality reasserting itself in a moment of clarity. Where are we going? I demanded. Mr. Castellano's residence, the driver replied, his face impassive. This was my last chance to turn back, to return to my safe, predictable life of endless shifts and mounting bills. To remain Emma Carter, nobody special, invisible to men like Dante Castellano. I got in the car. The drive took us out of the city, through winding roads that climbed into the hills overlooking the skyline. Security gates parted at our approach, revealing a long, cypress-lined driveway that led to a sprawling estate set against the darkening sky. The house, mansion, really, was a modern fortress of glass and stone, its clean lines softened by strategic lighting that cast the surrounding gardens in a warm glow. 2 men in dark suits flanked the entrance, hands clasped before them in the universal posture of security personnel. "This way, Miss Carter," said one, opening the massive front door. The interior was a study in understated luxury. Soaring ceilings, museum-worthy art, and furnishings that managed to be both minimal and undoubtedly expensive. Nothing gaudy or ostentatious, just the quiet confidence of old money and power. I was led through a series of rooms, each more impressive than the last, until we reached what appeared to be a study. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city below, now a carpet of twinkling lights in the darkness. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across leather and wood. Dante stood with his back to me, silhouetted against the view. Even in repose, he radiated a tension that set my nerves on edge. A predator at rest, but never truly relaxed. "Emma," he said without turning, my name rich in his mouth. "You came." Did I have a choice? The words escaped before I could censor them. He turned then, and something in his expression made my breath catch. He'd changed from the previous night's formal attire to dark trousers and a crisp white shirt, open at the collar to reveal the strong column of his throat. More casual, yet no less commanding. "We always have choices," he said, moving toward me with the fluid grace I remembered. "Though rarely ones without consequences." I lifted my chin. "Why am I here, Dante?" "Direct." "I like that." He gestured to a pair of leather armchairs positioned before the fire. "Sit, please." I perched on the edge of one chair while he took the other, studying me with that same unsettling intensity. "You refused my gift," he observed. "I kept the bracelet," I countered, turning my wrist to show the silver gleaming against my skin. A concession, a peace offering. "But not the money, or the debt settlement." His tone was neutral, giving nothing away. "I can't accept that kind of generosity from a stranger." Dante's mouth curved into a faint smile. "Is that what you think it is? Generosity?" The question hung between us, loaded with implication. I swallowed hard. "What would you call it?" "An investment." I stiffened. "In what, exactly?" "You." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. In the firelight, his eyes were bottomless. "I want to make you an offer, Emma." "I'm not for sale," I said automatically, though my voice lacked conviction. His smile widened, revealing perfect teeth. "Everyone is for sale. The only variables are price and terms." A chill ran through me despite the warmth of the fire. "What are your terms, then?" Dante reached for a decanter on the side table, pouring amber liquid into 2 crystal glasses. He offered one to me, his fingers brushing mine in a touch that sent electricity up my arm. "Your time," he said simply. "Your company, 3 months." I nearly choked on my sip of what turned out to be exceptionally smooth whiskey. "My company?" "As in, as my companion," he clarified. "At social functions, business dinners. Nothing more than your presence at my side." Relief mingled with disappointment in a confusing swirl. "You want a fake girlfriend?" Dante's laugh was unexpected, a rich sound that transformed his severe features. "Not precisely. I want a woman who isn't part of my world. Someone genuine, untouched by the politics and games that dominate my life. Someone who looks at me and sees a man, not an alliance or an opportunity." The vulnerability in his admission caught me off guard. I searched his face for signs of manipulation, but found only weary sincerity. "Why me?" I asked. "You could have anyone." "Because you tried to leave," he said simply. "Because you see the danger in me and face it anyway. Because you'd rather work 3 jobs than compromise your principles." He paused, his gaze intense. "And because when I look at you, I see something I lost a long time ago." "What's that?" "Hope." The word hung in the air between us, fragile and unexpected. "What do I get out of this arrangement?" I asked, trying to sound practical despite the warmth spreading through my chest. "Financial security," he replied promptly. "Your father's debts erased. Your apartment lease paid through the end of the year. A generous monthly allowance to allow you to quit at least 2 of your jobs and focus on your education." I blinked in surprise. "How did you—" The textbooks in your apartment, psychology, if I'm not mistaken. His observation skills were unnerving. I'd been taking night classes for years, slowly working toward a degree that seemed perpetually out of reach. And what happens after 3 months? I asked. We go our separate ways. No obligations, no strings. You return to your life, considerably more financially stable. And I returned to mine. It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. And if I refuse? Dante's expression sobered. Then I have my driver take you home, and we never see each other again, just like that. No threats, no consequences. I'm many things, Emma, but I'm not a monster. I don't force women into arrangements they don't want. He leaned back, studying me. Though I think you do want this, whether you're ready to admit it or not. His confidence should have infuriated me, but there was truth in his words. Despite every rational argument against it, some part of me was already calculating how many credit hours I could complete with more time, how it would feel to sleep without the constant weight of debt crushing my chest. And beneath those practical considerations lurked something darker, more primal, the undeniable pull I felt toward this dangerous man, the thrill that shot through me whenever his eyes met mine. If I agree, I said slowly, I have conditions. Dante's eyebrows rose fractionally, but he gestured for me to continue. I keep my diner job, 1 shift a week. I need something normal to hold on to. He considered this, then nodded. Acceptable. What else? My roommate can't know the truth. No one can. As far as anyone's concerned, we're dating normally. Done. Anything else? I took a deep breath. No one gets hurt because of me. I won't be used to get to anyone, threaten anyone, or, I don't know, whatever it is you might do. A shadow crossed his face. You still don't know who I am, do you? I know enough, I replied. I know you're dangerous, connected, powerful. And yet here you sit, negotiating terms. There was a note of admiration in his voice. I lifted my chin. Do we have a deal? Dante studied me for a long moment, firelight dancing across his features. Then he extended his hand, an oddly formal gesture. We have a deal, Emma Carter. I placed my hand in his, my smaller fingers engulfed by his warm grip. The sensation of his skin against mine sent a jolt through my body that had nothing to do with fear. 3 months, I said, as much to myself as to him. His smile was slow, predatory. Beginning tonight. The first week of our arrangement passed in a surreal blur. Dante insisted I move into the guest house on his estate, for convenience, he claimed, though we both knew it was to keep me close. The guest house, a misnomer if ever there was one, was larger than any apartment I'd ever lived in, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a private garden, a kitchen stocked with foods I'd never tasted, and a closet gradually filling with designer clothes that appeared mysteriously each day. I'd told Melissa I was house-sitting for a wealthy client from the diner, a half-truth that explained my sporadic appearances at our apartment. She'd been suspicious but distracted by her own hectic schedule at the hospital, for which I was grateful. The fewer questions, the better. True to his word, Dante hadn't pressured me for anything beyond my company. Our interactions were primarily over dinners in the main house, where I learned fragments about the empire he controlled. Import-export businesses, real estate holdings, investment portfolios. The legitimate face of operations I suspected ran much deeper into shadows. I kept my weekly shift at the diner, where Gina eyed me with equal parts curiosity and concern, but knew better than to ask questions. The hospital bills had been paid, my eviction notice had disappeared, and I'd enrolled in a full course load for the upcoming semester. Tangible benefits that helped quiet the voice in my head, warning me this arrangement would end badly. On the 8th day, everything changed. I was reading in the guest house when a knock at the door revealed Antonio, Dante's most trusted security detail. Mr. Castellano requests your presence at the main house, he said, his expression giving nothing away. You'll need to dress for an event. My stomach fluttered. What kind of event? A dinner party. You'll find appropriate attire in your closet. Indeed, hanging prominently was a dress I hadn't seen before, a deep emerald silk that shimmered in the light, classic in cut, but undeniably expensive. Beside it sat a shoebox containing strappy heels that probably cost more than a month's rent at my old apartment. As I slipped into the dress, I couldn't help but admire how perfectly it fit, as if tailored precisely to my measurements. The thought that Dante had studied me so carefully was both thrilling and unsettling. Antonio escorted me to the main house, where Dante waited in the foyer. He wore a tailored black suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, his dark hair slicked back, his usual intensity magnified by formal attire. When he saw me, something flickered in his eyes. Appreciation, possessiveness, desire. Gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "You look beautiful," he said simply, his gaze lingering on the silver bracelet at my wrist, the only piece of jewelry I wore. "Thank you," I replied, smoothing the silk nervously. "Where are we going?" "My home in the city. I'm hosting a gathering of business associates." He stepped closer, adjusting a lock of my hair with unexpected gentleness. "This will be your first public appearance as my companion. There are things you should know." The serious tone sent a chill down my spine. "What things?" "The people you'll meet tonight operate by different rules than you're accustomed to. They'll be curious about you, watching for weaknesses, testing boundaries." His eyes held mine. "Stay close to me. Speak little. Observe much." "You're scaring me," I admitted. His mouth quirked into a half-smile. "Good. Fear keeps you alert. But remember," his hand moved to rest lightly at the small of my back, warm through the thin silk. "You're under my protection. No one would dare harm what belongs to me." The possessive statement should have offended me. Instead, it sent a forbidden thrill racing through my veins. Dante's penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a sleek high-rise downtown, its modern luxury a stark contrast to the old-world elegance of his estate. When we arrived, the party was already underway, perhaps 30 people in evening wear, scattered throughout the sprawling space, attended by discreet staff offering champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Conversations hushed momentarily as we entered, curious glances sliding our way before resuming with increased animation. I felt their assessment like a physical touch, cataloging my dress, my posture, my proximity to Dante. "Breathe," he murmured, his lips close to my ear. "You're doing fine." His hand at my back guided me through the crowd. Some guests he bypassed entirely. Others received brief acknowledgments. Only a select few warranted introductions. "Vincent," Dante greeted a silver-haired man whose sharp eyes missed nothing. "I'd like you to meet Emma, the mysterious companion we've been hearing about." Vincent took my offered hand, his grip firm but not aggressive. "A pleasure, my dear. I was beginning to think Dante had invented you as an excuse to avoid my dinner invitations." I smiled politely. "It's nice to meet you." Vincent's gaze flicked to Dante. "She's charming. Where did you find her?" "She found me, actually," Dante replied, his tone light, but carrying an undercurrent I was learning to recognize. A warning. Vincent raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. "Well, Emma, I hope we'll be seeing more of you." Dante could use some softening influences. As we moved away, I whispered, "Who was that?" "Vincent Moretti, an old family friend. Relatively harmless, but never forget he reports everything to competing interests." Before I could ask which competing interests, we were approached by a striking couple, the man tall and athletic, the woman a willowy blonde whose beauty was enhanced rather than diminished by the faint lines around her eyes. "Dante," the man said warmly, clasping Dante's shoulder in a familiar gesture few would dare. "About time you showed up at your own party." "Marco." Dante's usual reserve softened fractionally. "Sophia, I'd like you to meet Emma." Sophia assessed me with kind but shrewd eyes. "So you're the one who's got everyone talking." Her accent was faintly European, Italian perhaps. "It's lovely to meet you. Marco is my cousin," Dante explained, "and one of the few people in this room I actually trust." Marco laughed. "He means I'm the only one who beat him up as a child and lived to tell about it." He winked at me. Family privilege. The casual revelation of their shared childhood momentarily humanized Dante in a way nothing else had. I tried to picture him as a boy, before whatever forces had shaped him into the dangerous man at my side. Our circuit of the room continued, each introduction carefully calculated. I met politicians who pretended not to recognize Dante in public, business magnates who deferred to him with thinly veiled fear, and women who assessed me with envy or calculation or both. Through it all, Dante kept me close, his hand rarely leaving the small of my back, his attention returning to me regularly despite the demands of his guests. The possessive gestures didn't feel stifling as they might have from another man. Instead, they grounded me in the unfamiliar environment, a silent reassurance of his protection. An hour into the evening, I excused myself to find the restroom, needing a moment alone to process the dizzying array of encounters. Dante pointed me toward a hallway off the main room, his eyes following me as I slipped away. The bathroom was a sanctuary of marble and soft lighting. I took a deep breath, studying my reflection. The woman who stared back seemed like a stranger, polished, elegant, moving through this world of wealth and power as if she belonged. The transformation was startling. When I emerged, I took a wrong turn and found myself in a darkened study. I was about to retreat when voices from the adjoining room caught my attention. Risky, bringing her into this world. A man's voice, vaguely familiar from earlier introductions. Dante knows what he's doing, Marco's distinctive tone. Besides, have you seen how he looks at her? I haven't seen him like this since Eliana. That's precisely my concern. We all remember how that ended. My breath caught. Eliana? Who was she? This is different, Marco insisted. Emma isn't involved in the business. She's clean. For now. But how long before she starts asking questions? Noticing things? You can't keep someone that close without them eventually seeing the truth. That's Dante's problem to handle. It becomes all our problem if she's a liability. The Cardetti family is still looking for retribution after last month's territory dispute. They'd love nothing more than to find Dante's weakness. I backed away silently, heart hammering in my chest. I'd suspected Dante's business wasn't entirely legitimate, but territory disputes? Retribution? The concrete reality of his world suddenly felt much more dangerous than the abstract notion I'd been entertaining. Lost in these thoughts, I didn't notice the woman approaching until we nearly collided in the hallway. "Oh, I'm sorry," I apologized automatically. She was stunning in a severe way. Sharp cheekbones, raven hair cut in a sleek bob, eyes that assessed me with undisguised hostility. "So you're Dante's new toy," she said, her red lips curving into something that wasn't quite a smile. I stiffened at the dismissive tone. "I'm Emma. Francesca Venucci." She looked me up and down with the air of someone examining an inferior product. "Enjoying your Cinderella moment?" The deliberate barb hit its mark. "Excuse me?" "Oh, don't be offended, darling. Dante's always had a weakness for charity cases, though usually he tires of them quickly." She leaned closer, her expensive perfume almost cloying. "He'll give you pretty things, take you to beautiful places, make you feel special, but eventually, he remembers who he is, who you are, and it ends." "You sound like you speak from experience," I replied, finding my voice. Her eyes flashed. "Let's just say I've known Dante a very long time, long enough to recognize his patterns." She brushed past me, then paused. "Do yourself a favor, Emma. Enjoy the luxury, take the gifts, but guard your heart. In Dante's world, sentiment is a weakness none of us can afford." She disappeared down the hallway, leaving me shaken. I took a moment to compose myself before returning to the party, but Dante spotted me immediately, breaking away from a conversation to intercept me. "You were gone a long time," he said, his voice casual but his eyes searching my face. "Everything all right?" "Fine," I lied. "Just got turned around." His gaze lingered on mine, clearly detecting the falsehood, but choosing not to press. At least not here, surrounded by watching eyes. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur. I smiled and nodded at appropriate intervals, but my mind churned with new questions. Who was Eliana? What had happened to her? And what territory dispute had Marco mentioned? More troubling still was the realization that I was being watched not just as Dante's mysterious new companion, but as a potential weakness to be exploited. The thought sent ice through my veins. By the time the last guests departed, my nerves were frayed to breaking. Dante dismissed his security team with a nod, leaving us alone in the now quiet penthouse. He loosened his tie as he moved to the bar, pouring 2 drinks without asking if I wanted one. "You heard something tonight," he said without preamble, handing me a glass of amber liquid. Not a question, but a statement of fact. I considered lying again, but those dark eyes saw too much. I overheard Marco talking to someone. They mentioned a name, Eliana? Dante went very still. The only sign of disturbance, a slight tightening of his jaw. Anything else? Something about territory disputes. The Cardetti family wanting retribution. I hesitated, then added, "And I met Francesca." A muscle ticked in his cheek. "Francesca has a unique talent for venom. Whatever she said to you, she implied she knew you intimately." I interrupted, "that I was just the latest in a pattern." Dante set down his glass and moved closer, until I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. Francesca and I were engaged, briefly. A business arrangement between families that ended badly. The admission caught me off guard. "You were going to marry her?" It was expected. Convenient. His eyes never left mine, until I realized I would rather be alone than spend my life with someone whose ambition eclipsed any capacity for genuine emotion. The intensity of his gaze made it difficult to breathe. "And Eliana?" Pain flashed across his features, so raw and unexpected it made my heart clench. "A story for another time." He reached out, his fingers brushing my cheek in a touch so gentle it seemed at odds with the power I knew those hands possessed. "You're tired. We should go." The deflection was obvious, but I recognized a closed door when I saw one. Whoever Eliana had been, the wound was still fresh. As we rode back to the estate in silence, the weight of all I didn't know about Dante Castellano pressed down on me. I had entered his world, accepted his protection, but remained blind to crucial pieces of the puzzle. What dangers lurked in those shadows? And more importantly, when the 3 months ended, would I be able to walk away unscathed? Not just from his world, but from the man himself. 2 months into our arrangement, I barely recognized my life. My daily routine had transformed from exhausting shifts and worry to leisurely mornings studying in the garden, afternoons attending classes at the university where I'd enrolled full-time, and evenings often spent at Dante's side at various functions. The facade had become almost too easy to maintain. To the outside world, we were simply a couple, albeit an unusual one, the dangerous Mafia boss and the ordinary waitress, a modern fairy tale that set tongues wagging throughout the city. In private, our relationship remained ostensibly professional, though the boundaries grew increasingly blurred. Dante never pushed for physical intimacy, but his eyes followed me with undisguised hunger that matched the ache building in my own body. Our conversations over late-night drinks in his study had grown deeper, more personal. I learned about his childhood, raised by a stern father after his mother's death. He listened with surprising interest to stories of my life before we met. My father's kindness, my struggles to keep afloat, my dreams of finishing my degree. What he never discussed was his business, the true nature of his empire, the source of the fear I saw in people's eyes when he entered a room. Those questions remained unasked. A wall between us I wasn't brave enough to scale. Until tonight. I sat at my usual place in the university library, textbooks spread before me, when a shadow fell across the table. Looking up, I expected to see my study partner Sarah. Instead, I found a stranger, a man in his 30s with watchful eyes and a police detective's badge clipped to his belt. "Emma Carter?" he asked quietly, mindful of the library setting. My stomach dropped. "Yes?" "Detective Michael Reeves." He slid into the chair across from me. I was hoping we could talk. I glanced around, suddenly aware of how isolated we were in this corner of the stacks. None of Dante's security detail was in sight. I'd insisted on attending classes alone, a small freedom I'd clung to. "What about?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Dante Castellano." He studied my reaction closely. "Your boyfriend, correct?" The hesitation before boyfriend spoke volumes. "I'm not sure what this is about, detective." He placed a manila folder on the table between us. "I've been investigating the Castellano crime family for 3 years. We're building a RICO case that could finally bring them down." My blood turned to ice. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do." His voice remained calm, almost sympathetic. 3 months ago, you were working 3 jobs to pay off medical debt. Now you're suddenly enrolled full-time, living in a guest house on a multi-million-dollar estate, and appearing on the arm of one of the most dangerous men in the city. When I didn't respond, he continued, I'm not here to threaten you, Emma. I'm here to offer you protection. Whatever hold Castellano has on you, whatever arrangement you've made, we can help you get out. There's nothing to get out of, I said stiffly. My relationship with Dante is personal, and none of your business. Is it personal? His gaze was penetrating. Or is it a business transaction? A debt paid in exchange for your companionship? The accuracy of his assessment struck too close to home. I began gathering my books. I'm not talking to you without a lawyer. Before you go, he opened the folder, removing a photograph that he slid across the table. It showed a young woman with dark hair and delicate features. She was beautiful in a fragile way, her smile hesitant but genuine. Something about her seemed hauntingly familiar, though I was certain we'd never met. Eliana Rossi, Detective Reeves said quietly. Dante's last companion. She disappeared 14 months ago. Her body washed up on the shoreline 3 weeks later. My heart stuttered. I don't believe you. Her family tried to press charges, but witnesses mysteriously forgot what they'd seen. Evidence disappeared. His eyes held mine. She tried to leave him, Emma. With shaking hands, I pushed the photograph back. Dante wouldn't. He isn't a killer? Reeves finished gently. He's the head of an organization responsible for at least 24 murders in the last 5 years. Drug trafficking, extortion, money laundering. He paused. Did you really not know? Or have you just been trying very hard not to see? Before I could respond, a familiar voice cut through the quiet library atmosphere. Emma, there you are. Marco strode toward us, his usual easy smile nowhere in sight. His eyes flicked to Reeves, then back to me, a muscle ticking in his jaw. Everything okay here? He asked, his tone light but his posture alert. Detective Reeves stood slowly. Just a friendly conversation. Seems like you've said all you need to, Marco replied, his message clear. He turned to me. Dante's been trying to reach you. Your phone's off. I fumbled in my bag, realizing I'd silenced it during class and forgotten to turn the volume back up. 5 missed calls from Dante's private line. I'll give you my card, Reeves said, placing it on the table. When you're ready to talk, call me. Day or night. With that, he walked away, leaving the photograph of Eliana face down on the table. Marco waited until he was out of earshot. What did he want? I stared at the detective's retreating back. To tell me things I think I already knew but didn't want to face. Marco's expression softened slightly. Let's get you home. Dante's worried. The drive back to the estate passed in tense silence. My mind raced with Detective Reeves's revelations, comparing them against what I knew, or thought I knew, about Dante. Was I truly so blind? Or had I willfully ignored the truth because the alternative was too frightening to contemplate? Dante waited in the foyer when we arrived, his face a mask of controlled fury. His eyes swept over me as if checking for injuries before he dismissed Marco with a curt nod. Are you all right? He asked once we were alone. Am I in danger? I countered, fear making my voice sharper than intended. His expression hardened. What did Reeves tell you? He showed me a picture of Eliana. The name hung in the air between us, charged with unspoken history. Dante's jaw clenched, his eyes darkening. Without a word, he turned and walked toward his study, clearly expecting me to follow. Inside the wood-paneled room, he poured himself a drink but didn't offer me one. When he finally spoke, his voice was controlled, dangerously quiet. Detective Reeves has a personal vendetta against my family. He'll say anything to turn you against me. Did he lie? I challenged. About Eliana? About your business? Dante's gaze was impenetrable. What do you think you know about my business, Emma? I know enough. My voice trembled despite my efforts to steady it. I've seen how people look at you, with fear. I've heard fragments of conversations, noticed how quickly people change the subject when I enter a room. I took a shaking breath. I'm not naive, Dante. I know your wealth doesn't come just from legitimate investments, but murder? Drug trafficking? Is that who you really are? He set down his glass with deliberate care. Yes. The simple admission knocked the wind from my lungs. Part of me had been hoping for denials, for explanations that would let me continue the comforting self-deception. My family has controlled certain aspects of this city's economy for 3 generations, he continued, his tone matter of fact. Some of those aspects operate outside the law. I inherited that responsibility, along with the consequences it carries. And Eliana? I whispered, dreading the answer. Did you kill her when she tried to leave? Rage flashed across his features, so visceral it made me step back. Is that what Reeves told you? He closed the distance between us in 2 strides, his hands gripping my shoulders. Eliana was pregnant with my child when the Cardetti family had her killed to send me a message. She didn't try to leave me. She was taken from me. The raw pain in his voice couldn't be fabricated. I stared up at him, seeing beyond the controlled facade to the grief he'd carried alone. She was an innocent, he continued, his grip gentling. Someone I failed to protect because I underestimated how far my enemies would go. I won't make that mistake again. The implication hung heavy between us. The territory dispute Marco had mentioned, the retribution the Cardetti family sought, suddenly it all made terrible sense. This wasn't just business rivalry, it was blood vendetta. That's why you wanted me to move here, I realized. Why you insist on security. You're not just protecting me from your world, you're protecting me from your enemies. Something like relief crossed his features. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have stayed if I had? He countered. If I'd told you the full truth that first night, would you have accepted my offer? The answer was obvious to us both. I would have run as far and as fast as possible. Our arrangement ends in 3 weeks, I said quietly. What happens then? Do I just go back to my life, pretend none of this happened? Dante's expression shifted, something fierce and possessive replacing the earlier vulnerability. Is that what you want? To leave? His hand moved to cup my face, his touch gentle despite the intensity in his eyes. Tell me you haven't felt what's growing between us. The contact sent electricity through my body. I couldn't lie. Not to him, not to myself. I've felt it. Then stay, he said simply. Not as part of our arrangement, not as my companion for show. Stay because you want to, because what we have is real. How could it be real? I asked, even as I leaned into his touch. Our entire relationship is built on a transaction. You bought me, Dante. No. His thumb brushed my lower lip, sending shivers down my spine. I created an opportunity to know you. Everything since has been your choice. Had it? The line between obligation and desire had blurred so gradually, I couldn't pinpoint when my feelings had transformed. When his proximity had become something I craved rather than endured, when his rare smiles had become treasures I collected. I can't be part of your world, I whispered. The violence, the danger, you already are part of it, he interrupted. The moment Reeves approached you, you became a target. If you leave now without my protection, you'll be vulnerable. Fear clutched at my throat. Are you threatening me? Pain flashed in his eyes. I'm trying to keep you safe, the only way I know how. By keeping me in a gilded cage? Another possession to be guarded? By keeping you alive, he growled, his control slipping. Do you think I want this for you? For us? I've spent every day of the past 2 months trying to shield you from the ugliness of my life while selfishly keeping you close because I can't bear the thought of letting you go. The raw confession hung in the air between us. For the first time, I saw Dante Castellano stripped of his power and control. Just a man fighting against forces he'd inherited, trapped in a life that threatened to destroy anyone he cared for. In that moment of clarity, I made my decision. Rising on my toes, I pressed my lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, a question. His body went rigid with surprise before his arms wrapped around me, pulling me against him as the kiss deepened into something hungry and desperate. Years of loneliness and longing poured into the connection, his mouth claiming mine with a possessiveness that left me breathless. When we finally broke apart, his eyes were dark with desire and something more complex, hope mingled with fear. I'll stay, I whispered against his lips. Not because I have to, not because of our arrangement, but because walking away from you would hurt more than any danger your world might bring. His forehead rested against mine, his breathing unsteady. I'll protect you with my life. I know, I said simply. And I did know, with absolute certainty, that Dante Castellano would burn the world to ash before he let harm come to me. The knowledge should have terrified me. Instead, it felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. I had sat at the wrong table that night, a mistake that had irrevocably altered the course of my life. But as Dante's arms tightened around me, I couldn't bring myself to regret it. Some mistakes, it seemed, were fate disguised as chance.